Pleasure to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ollie. Ollie and I go back 28 years because in the early 90s I started a trio after studying at Adelaide Uni, and James, his son, was one of the two bassists that went in and out of my trio for those following years. So it's been great to maintain a friendship, of course, with James, but also with you, Ollie, for all these years. So thank you very much. Now, I want to tell you a little story. Some years ago, 3 men died and went to heaven, and they're standing at the pearly gates, and St. Peter says, to determine what part of heaven you're going to live in, I need to know how much money you made during the last year you were alive. And so the first guy steps up and he says, how much money did you make in the last year you were alive? And he says, I made $100,000. And he goes, okay, go through the gates down there to the left. And the second guy comes up and steps up, and St. Peter says, how much money did you make in the last year you were alive? And he said, 2.1 million. And he said, what did you do for a living? He said, I was a plastic surgeon. And he goes, okay, go through the pearly gates and down there to the right. And then the third guy steps up and he says, how much money did you make in the last year you were alive? And he said, $780. And St. Peter says, what instrument do you play? And I think the story fits well with the notion that musicians the tuba. Ollie says he must have been a tuba player or a banjo player. But it fits with the notion that many people believe that musicians, have a struggling career, and it's, in some ways it's very true. But I was one of the ones that very fortunate to have sustained this career for nearly 30 years and made a decent living and been able to see so much of the world. And I realised as a young boy, my father is a retired Uniting Church minister, David Purling, and chaplain at Westminster School for 19 years. And as Ollie touched on, in the early years of their marriage, they had 2 daughters of their own. But back then in 1970, Mum and Dad were actually thinking about, they were living in Port Augusta at the time, and thinking about adopting an Aboriginal child, which is pretty unheard of back then in the 70s, right? And then they thought there was more of a need to adopt from Vietnam. And then that's where Ollie's story came in, and that's where I was adopted out to Australia. And then when I was only 8 months old, and then when I was 2.5 years old, Mum and Dad thought, oh, the first one turned out well, we'll get another one. So they went ahead and adopted my brother Michael, and he was 10 days younger than me when he came out to Australia. So we've got 2. My brother died just last year, unfortunately, in a car accident. But we had a wonderful family of 6. But my point is, being a Uniting Church minister and a family of 4 children, we didn't exactly go to Milan and Saint Tropez for school holidays. But we did do a lot of trips around Australia by caravan and camping, and that was really wonderful. But my point is, Mum and Dad weren't the wealthiest people in the world, but they were always able to help people. And that was shown through the ministry that Dad served, but also through the work they did in the humanitarian work. And the first memory I remember of them ever doing that was some families, I think it was about 6 or 7 families, came to Marion Uniting Church where we were attending at the time, and I was just probably about 12 or 11 years old. And these 6 or 7 Vietnamese boat families came out, escaped from Vietnam, and came out to our church, and they had nowhere to go. And my parents found them a house to live in. Mum and Dad too, very creative people. Mum was sewing doilies together, knitting doilies and tissue box covers and lampshades and quilts and all that sort of stuff, helping this family get on their feet. And I thought, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. What a wonderful gesture. And I think they did continue to do that and still do today, help so many people in the community in that way, and it's always stayed with me and always weighed on my conscience, what am I doing to help others? And I remember also when that family came to Australia, we took the Vietnamese family's kids for a ride in the car, and they'd never ever been in a car before. And I thought, that's remarkable. And I thought to myself, what endurance you need to have as people to come to escape your own country and come and start all over again in another country. And it made me think, what happened to the other 6 or 7 families? What are their stories? So that was just the first experience I had when it came to humanitarian work. And I want to go back to Ollie's story and just show you a couple of photographs. So I hope you can look up on the screens here and the TVs, because here is Mum and Dad. And I was good looking once. And that's Mum and the other three ladies at Melbourne Airport waiting for the babies to arrive. And there we are, just minutes later, in the waiting lounge at Melbourne Airport. And that's Mum and I there. That's August 23, 1973. And that's my elder sister Rebecca with my mother. And then I assimilated into South Australia quite well. There's my belly full of food at last. And got into the Australian way of life with a West End beer can hat. So now I want to just talk about how I got into my music. Well, Ollie wanted me to share some of my backstory about my career. And when I was about 3 years old, Mum and Dad had some friends at the house, and I was singing apparently relatively in tune when I was about 3 years old, and they thought, oh, he's probably got some talent there. And then when I was 5 years old and 6 years old, I used to watch my elder sister, Rebecca, doing her piano practice in the house. And when I was 6 and she'd finished practicing, I would come over to the keyboard, reach up to the piano, and played what she'd been practicing by ear. So she gave up the piano and took up the flute or something like that. And then I started formal classical training from the age of 6, all the way through primary school, all the way into high school, through high school and into university. But during my primary school years, I was playing TV themes, songs off the radio. All my pocket money was going to buy sheet music at Allen's Music in Gawler Place. You remember that? Yeah. And I was just a musical sponge, absorbing everything I could at the time. And then in my last years of high school, I got introduced to jazz by a pianist called Kern Bailey. Do you know Kern? Yeah, we saw him last night at Living Choice Fullerton for the Sala exhibition. But Kern introduced me to some music, and jazz music, George Shearing, solo piano interpretations. At the end of my final year, I just spent all year learning all this classical repertoire from my teacher, and I got bitten by the jazz bug and said 2 weeks later, I want to play some jazz. So I changed my complete program 2 weeks before my final matric exam, which gave my music teacher a heart attack at the time, but I did something right. And then I decided to go on to study jazz at Adelaide Uni, like Paul. So I was struck by the jazz music. It resonated with me in a way that no other kind of music has. And I studied at Adelaide Uni, and then started working around town for the next 6 years in Melbourne and Sydney at jazz festivals there, doing gigs in local establishments, working in the government sector for the opening of buildings, for the Dalai Lama when he came to town, corporate sector, big shows like that. And I did 250 gigs a year during those 6 years from 1992 to 1998. So after that, I thought that I sort of reached my capacity here in Adelaide, and I wanted to spread my wings and go to America. I thought, if I'm going to play jazz, I need to be in New York and be in the States. And at that time, a friend of mine was studying at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and gave them one of my CDs, which James is playing on. And they said, oh, we'd love to have Kym come out here and do a master's degree in Las Vegas, of all places, and teach at the university. So I flew out when I was 26 years old to Las Vegas. Quite a contrast to Adelaide, I must say. And and I taught on the university faculty, so eventually I had some experience teaching on a university level, completed a master's degree. I brought an 18-piece big band from the university back to Adelaide in 1999, which was covered by the 730 report. They did a wonderful documentary about that. And that was but the real education I had in Las Vegas was working in the showrooms with all these great American stars. Buddy Greco, the Mills Brothers. Do you remember the Mills Brothers? Kay Starr, Joe Williams, Carl Fontana, Marlena Shaw, Michelle Legrand, who came out to perform for the opening of the Paris Resort. So I was in Las Vegas not only to teach, but actually to learn a lot from working in the showrooms with all these amazing musicians and entertainers. So I learned more about the entertainment industry than I did about just being a musician. I was watching how they put their shows together, the jokes they say, the material that created the arc to the shows that they did, and it was such a valuable experience. But I just want to quickly go back to the Adelaide days when I was in my teens. I played for the first Australian Grand Prix, and Mum had a 1984 Toyota Corolla, and I said to them, I'm going to be playing for the Grand Prix. The Grand Prix is in Adelaide, and I took Mum's Corolla down pit straight, and I put it and I drove it into the pits and put the bonnet up and took a photo because I knew that wasn't going to last for long. It didn't really, did it? Went to Melbourne. And so that was a story I wanted to share. And then when I was 14 years old, some of you might remember a British singer that resided in Adelaide called Wally Carr. And Wally was teaching at Westminster at the time I was there, and was a real influence on I guess, my showmanship and getting as much experience as I could. And he said, Kym, you really should go on TV. And I'm 16 years old thinking, why would I want to do that? And he says, I'm going to put your name down to go on New Faces. And I'll tell you now, I was nervous, really, really nervous to get 2 minutes on the show. And the cameras are whizzing around me, and I'm looking nervously at the piano. But I'm going to show you a little bit of this video in a minute. But it put me in good stead for a lot of things I was going to do after, because you don't do many things that are going to get your nerves as high as going on national TV in Australia. So I'm going to show you a little bit. Would you like to see it? There you go. Yeah. So even now, Mum, she's about 78 years old, she's always telling me if I'm dressed appropriately or not, but she didn't really care how my hair looked when I went on national TV. So one other thing I did while still based in Australia was working. I was fortunate enough. Mum saw a newspaper article in the Advertiser. It was a little ad, sorry, not an article, only about a matchbox size ad from AsiaLink in Melbourne. And AsiaLink's a Melbourne-based, University of Melbourne-based organisation that places Australian practitioners in arts organisations in Asia. And she said, why don't you apply for that? You've always wanted to go back to Vietnam, because as a young boy, I was always more interested, very, very interested to learn more about my roots. And they were looking for a dramaturg at the time, and I thought, no, I can't do that. And so, but I applied anyway, and I put a whole personal story about why I wanted to go back to Vietnam. And they gave the residency to someone else, but was so impressed by my application that they created a residency for me. And in 1996, I was 24 years old. I went to Vietnam for the first time since being adopted there, and did 3 months residency funded by Cameron McIntosh. Do you know Cameron McIntosh? For those that don't know, he's one of the largest entertainment sources in the world. He produces all of Andrew Lloyd Webber, Claude Michel Schoenberg, and Alan Bill's big blockbuster Broadway shows in the West End in London. And so I went to Vietnam, and it was the first time that I actually realised the power of music, that it really, really is the universal language. I went there not knowing a single person. I went there not having travelled overseas before, and I went there with this sum of money and a goal to use that money in the most rewarding way for the people in Vietnam. And after 1 month of pretty much hell trying to make ties and develop ties and create opportunities for myself in Vietnam, I started to have some breakthroughs, and I met a woman called Tet Loan, who was one of the singers in the GI camps during the Vietnamese War. And she was the only person I'd met at the time that spoke English, and she loves jazz, and I'm thinking, finally I'm getting somewhere. And we put on some concerts together, but she had she was singing in a pop band that would play at lots of different venues in Saigon, in Ho Chi Minh City, and but she wanted to sing jazz, so she had all Vietnamese speaking musicians. None of them spoke Vietnamese at all. And so for 3 months I tirelessly wrote arrangements for these musicians, told the musicians what they needed to do to play jazz. I sat at the drum kit, showed the drummer what I needed him to do, and somehow pulled all this music together, transcending these cultural and language barriers. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences, digging deep down into myself to find what I needed to produce the music, and this is what came out. so after the Las Vegas years, during the Las Vegas years, I should say, I was working with a woman that was singing with Wayne Newton. You know Wayne Newton? And Jacqueline got a phone call from a theatrical company in New York City, and they said, look, we're touring the national tour of a Broadway show, Footloose the musical, around America, and it's only been going out around touring for 2 weeks, and we're going to fire our musical director. Do you know anyone that would want to see more of America and conduct a show? She said, my friend Kym would love to, right? Without even checking with me first. But she knew me well, and she knew that because at that time I'd only spent 2.5 years in Las Vegas, hadn't even made it to New York or anywhere else except for Los Angeles, 4 hours drive away. And so she put me in touch with the company manager, and 2.5 days later I flew to New York City. And I flew to Wilmington, Delaware, because the company was already on tour. And they'd just finished a show. All the actors and singers and dancers and musicians and crew were all asleep, ready to wake up early and go to the next town. But the company manager met me in the lobby of the hotel, and he gave me 2 huge binder folders that thick, Act 1 and Act 2 Conductor score of Footloose the musical, and he said, watch the Conductor on the next 2 nights, you start on Saturday night. I am not joking, that's exactly how it went down. And I did. I watched the Conductor and sat in the orchestra pit, watching all the actors and dancers on stage, the orchestra in the pit, wrote notes on every measure of the score, it seemed like. And then and during those 2 days, I stood in front of my hotel mirror like this, with the headphones on and the Conductor score of Footloose on the stand, and just sort of going like this and trying to make my hands work so the musicians could at least follow what I wanted them to do. And I did something right, because I took that Broadway show to 247 American cities over the next 11 months. And that was the beginning of the next 5-year chapter of conducting Broadway shows out of New York City. So following that, I was in New York, and I was in New York on 9/11, by the way, when that tragedy happened. But we would put together, we'd bring the directors and the dancers and the choreographers and the set makers all into New York, and we'd put together every little step of putting these Broadway shows together, and then for a couple of months, and then finally tour them. And then the next show that I worked on appropriately was Miss Saigon. And I was fortunate then too, because we toured with the show, and we had the engineer who played the lead in Miss Saigon had played the role for 15 years, and I'd just come to the show, but all the media across America were more interested to know my story. So I got more and more experience in front of the camera and doing TV appearances on the TV networks all across America for 2 years with Miss Saigon. So that was really worthwhile. But the final Broadway show that I worked on, was my favourite, because it's got a lot of swinging jazz songs, and that was 42nd Street. So I'm going to show you a little montage of that. Actually, I took this off of YouTube. It's a clip I put on YouTube, but there's a lot more of 42nd Street and Miss Saigon clips on there if you put my name into YouTube. After the 5 years of being on the road, traveling around America, and it was a wonderful experience. I've been to every podunk town, as they say in America, and larger metropolis across the states. It was wonderful. After that, I went to Florida, and I ended up having another Kym Purling trio there and doing concerts around America. And I was also working for a TV network in Florida, and had the good fortune of working with Natalie And this is a great story, and I'll be quick, because Natalie was coming to town. I said, Kym, could you play for Natalie when she comes? And she said yes, and Natalie's manager sent me all the music. It was a 1-hour Christmas holiday TV show broadcast across 50 United States across America. And I worked, and I thought to myself, I better learn all this music off by heart, because nobody wants to see a TV show with the pianist in his head in the music and music up on the piano. So I put that 1 hour of music with Natalie, committed it to memory, and it took me a few weeks to do it. And then, hello. She's adorable. It took me a few weeks to learn how to do it, and then finally on the day of the TV show, it was a 2 p.m. I think a weekday show, and I came to the studio 3 hours before the show was supposed to start. Musicians don't normally get to things 3 hours before, and then I sat down at the piano. They put lights and cameras all around me, and then about an hour later the live studio audience came in, and then about an hour later everyone just relaxed, and then I came back to the piano, and about 20 minutes before the show, the studio audience are all sitting there. I'm at the piano all ready to go, lights and camera all ready to go, but no sign of Natalie. I still hadn't even met Natalie. And then 5 minutes before the show, still hadn't met Natalie. And then 1 minute before the hour, the studio manager says to the production manager, okay, we're ready for Natalie. And then the production manager says to Natalie's personal manager, okay, we're ready for Natalie. And Natalie's manager says to Natalie's personal assistant, okay, we're ready for Natalie. And about 1 minute before the hour, Natalie appears in this beautiful silvery outfit and a glitzy microphone. And she came up on the stage, and the piano's there, and she's looking out like this, and she says, she looks around and goes, oh, you must be Kym. Shakes my hand, and then the production manager goes, 3, 2, 1. That's a true story. That's a true story. And in America, it's much different to here where you meet your colleagues and you go out for beer and lunch or whatever. In America, there's 100 other pianists that are all ready to step in after you. So it's very, very competitive. So this clip, you're going to see what happened. It looks like Natalie and I have worked for years together.
It's the most wonderful time of the year, with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you be of good cheer. It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Yes, there's Natalie. Isn't she beautiful? Yeah. Thank you. Now, the Florida years were really good. There was something that happened while I was in Florida, and I did some concerts at the Palladium Theatre there in St. Petersburg, across the bridge from Tampa. And I met a guy called Rob Rowan, who has a thing called the Global Action Coalition, another humanitarian organisation that does a lot of work in Nepal. And he said, Kym, how do you feel about doing a concert for us and raising money for the Global Action Coalition, because they were building schools, water treatment plants, bringing desks in, learning tools for the kids. And I thought, that's a really cool idea. And I thought, and that's exactly what we did. And I did a concert with my quintet at the time, and I didn't charge a fee, and we were able to send something $20,000 over to Nepal to help. And I thought that was really easy, you know. And it's the first time that I thought that I needed to do more of that. And I keep developing ties in Nepal, it seems, because and as Brenton said, I also do concerts to raise money for the Sunrise Children's Association. So please give to them willingly. Go to scai.org.au and make some donations there, because it's a very worthwhile cause. So anyway, after Florida, I worked on the road, and I worked with Engelbert Humperdinck all around the world, and with him for 2 years, conducting in some of the most prestigious concert halls around the world and some of the largest outdoor arenas around the world. And after Engelbert, I ended up in LA working at the Henson Studios, where they filmed the Muppets, and I was recording TV commercials for them there. And then after that, I decided I want to actually see more of the world and do my own music, and I'm sick of doing other people's music. So I ended up becoming a guest entertainer on cruise ships, and I flew to the cruise ships all over the world, high-end luxury cruise lines where they have theatres of up to 1,500 people. And I'm not playing the piano bar. I'm playing in theatres where I have a 7-piece band that play behind my shows, and I was able to. And we just do one show a week, and then I'd go to fly to another part of the world, and I've now travelled to 144 countries around the world. And one of those things, the greatest thing, and I'm nearly finished, Ollie. You're going to correct me on some of the facts, are you, Ollie? One of the things I love about all the travel I've done is not just to see the world, but actually I've probably most enjoyed being in countries that are developing. And that resonated again with my desire to help others. So I loved working in some South American countries, some Asian countries, and just starting to do concerts to raise money for other organisations that I met through people in other parts of the world. So to wrap it up, you know, I feel very, very fortunate. Ever since being adopted here, one of the first things I remember my parents ever telling me is that you adopted because one day I was going to work it out myself. And I realised how fortunate I was to come to South Australia and to have a wonderful upbringing, to discover music at such a young age, and now having taken it to the world and around the world to 144 countries. So I think the only way to show that appreciation is to give back to others, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to come here and speak to you today and share these experiences with you. So thank you very much.
I think we've got time for about one question. Anybody out there? Yep, I think one over here somewhere. Yeah.
Favorite venue, please?
No, I love to play in a good concert hall, and I didn't. Someone was standing over me, so I didn't get to that slide. And I've got a great picture of this guy here with Engelbert, and then on stage with him at Royal Albert Hall in London. So out of all the venues that I've played around the world, that's Royal Albert Hall, probably one of the most memorable concerts I've ever performed. Yeah. Another question?
Or question if it's a yes/no answer. Go.
Just wondering what you were up to now, why you're back in Adelaide.
Oh, yeah. Well, I came back to Adelaide not knowing how long I was going to be here and what I was going to do, but I just knew that I needed to come back. And as I said to you, Ollie, at the table, I didn't want to go back to New York for obvious reasons, and I didn't want to go back to my European base in Paris as this pandemic unfolded. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go home. I was in New Zealand doing a concert, and I thought, I'm so close to home, I'm going to go home and spend time with Mum and Dad. And 2 months later, my brother was killed exploring Vietnam on a motorbike. So it was really a good time to be home. And then Mum was diagnosed with breast cancer, and she's through that, so she survived that, and she's doing really, really well. But the highlight was, and this is the thing that's keeping me here, is I met my girlfriend Sonia sitting here. And she's wonderful, so I'm not going to go anywhere for a while. And what I've been doing since being back is doing some workshops with children in some of the private schools. I'm doing workshops and clinics at some of the private schools at Westminster, PAC, St Peter's Boys and things like that. And workshops and rehearsals with the kids, and some of those days of workshops have finished off with concerts as well. So that's been really good. So everything now being back is about giving back. So I'm teaching a handful of selected students at my home and doing a couple of gigs. I play at Luigi's on Friday and Saturday night on Franklin Street. And yeah, so come down there. Yeah, I've just got him a grand piano. We just brought it in, and so we have jazz duos there with the bass players there on Fridays and Saturdays. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing, yeah.
Thank you very much, Kym. Now, we're sort of running out of time, and I'm going to do the thing that we normally do, present Kym. Come back here while I give you a certificate. This is a certificate of appreciation, and the club's going to make a donation on your behalf to the sorts of charities that you've supported so willingly over the years. And I think Kym understated that a bit. God, he's done a lot since he's been back here and before in raising money for charities. I've been to a couple of concerts he's run, and they're fantastic. They've raised a lot of dough, and well done. And thank you very much for coming today, folks. I think you can well worth standing.